I never thought I'd die in a bathroom. Not on a plane. Not in some blaze of glory. Just there, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, surrounded by beige tile, with my robe half open and a damp floor mat twisted under me like some pathetic Greek tragedy set in a Midwestern home. It was Tuesday. I remember because I had just fed the cat and was halfway through brushing my teeth when the world turned sideways. My heel slid on a streak of conditioner I'd spilled earlier in the shower and forgot to clean. My head struck the corner of the vanity with a sound that I heard inside my bones, a dull, wet knock. Then came the blackness. But it wasn't empty. It wasn't still. When I opened my eyes, or thought I did, I wasn't on the bathroom floor anymore. I was standing, barefoot, in a hallway I had never seen before. The air smelled like paper and mildew, like an old public library that no one visits anymore. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale green glow on everything. The floor was industrial carpet. Gray. Worn. Stained with coffee rings and something darker. I walked forward, slowly, like I was moving through honey. My body felt light, unmoored. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming, or dying, or both. That's when I saw the office. It wasn't labeled, but I knew it was an office. Rows of identical cubicles stretched endlessly in every direction, like a graveyard of productivity. People sat at desks, motionless except for their hands. Tapping. Writing. Clicking. Filing. All wearing the same neutral clothes, gray, pale blue, beige, like they'd been told color was against regulation. No one looked at me. They weren't zombies. They weren't ghosts. They were people. Regular people. But drained. Their skin had that paper-thin quality of someone who's been in a hospital bed too long. Some were young. Some old. Some with eyes so hollow it was like they'd never once looked at anything they loved. I wanted to speak, to ask where I was, but my mouth felt stitched shut. The silence pressed in on me. Not empty silence. Intentional silence. Like everything here had a purpose. Like any sound out of place might bring consequences I couldn't imagine. I turned a corner, hoping to find a door, an exit, anything. But the rows of cubicles repeated like a mirrored labyrinth. I passed the same woman twice, short bob haircut, frowning, lips moving soundlessly as she typed. I passed her a third time. That's when I realized this place wasn't just big, it was looping. Panic began to rise in my throat. Then I saw him. An older man, gray beard, thick glasses, posture like someone who had given up on ever standing straight. He was stamping papers, one after another, mechanically. But as I passed him, his hand stopped mid-stamp. He looked up at me. His eyes were bright. "You're early," he said. I froze. My heart pounded, not in fear, but in recognition. I knew that voice. It was my father's. But my father had died 12 years ago in a hospital bed in Ohio. I'd held his hand while the machines went flat. I'd seen the emptiness in his eyes. And yet, here he was. Still working. He stood slowly, as if lifting a great weight. "They said you weren't supposed to be here yet," he murmured. "But maybe it's time." Time for what? I finally managed to say, my voice thin and hollow. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and gestured down a side corridor I hadn't noticed before. A narrow passage, dimly lit and humming with a strange, low-frequency sound. Not threatening. Just, wrong. I looked back at him, hoping for comfort. Clarity. Something. "Where am I?" I whispered. He looked at me, and in that moment his face shifted, just slightly. Something in his expression cracked, like an old mask showing the skin beneath. "You're where we go when we haven't finished yet," he said. Then he vanished. Not into thin air. Just faded into the backdrop, as though he'd never been there. As though I'd imagined him entirely. But I hadn't. Because his smell lingered, the same aftershave he wore when I was a child. The corridor ahead pulsed with a soft red light. Something deep inside me said not to walk down it. So of course I did. I took the first step. And the hallway swallowed me whole. The corridor narrowed with every step. At first it was just a hallway, dimly lit, lined with filing cabinets that buzzed faintly, like they were alive. But soon, the walls began to lean inward. Not physically, not in a way I could measure, but felt. Like walking into a space that wasn't meant to hold a person. Or maybe, wasn't meant to hold someone alive. The red light at the end throbbed, rhythmic and slow, like a heartbeat underwater. The air changed too. Thicker. Metallic. And cold in a way that seemed to seep into my memory, not my skin. I don't know how long I walked. The concept of time was beginning to slip, like a word you repeat too many times until it loses meaning. There were no clocks. No day or night. Just an eternal, muffled hum like some cosmic server room humming behind the veil of the universe. Then I saw her. A woman standing at a desk with her back to me. Auburn hair tied in a neat bun. Crisp gray blazer. She wasn't typing, like the others. She stood perfectly still, like she was waiting for someone, or something. She didn't turn around when I approached. "Excuse me," I said, my voice echoing oddly in the narrow space. She didn't move. I tried again. "I think I'm lost." She finally spoke. But not to me. "You are in Section 4B, Emotional Residue and Incomplete Identity. Your arrival is unexpected. Early. But not anomalous." Her voice was wrong. Monotone, but aware. Like something trying to imitate empathy and missing by one note. She turned then, slowly, revealing a face that was beautiful and absolutely blank. Eyes like wet marbles. A mouth that never fully smiled or frowned. Her name tag read. Eloise // Supervisor, Regret Division. "You will need to fill out a form," she said, handing me a clipboard. On it, rows and rows of empty boxes with questions I couldn't comprehend. What did you leave undone? How long did you pretend it didn't matter? What part of yourself did you abandon first? Did you ever plan to return? I stared at it, trembling. What is this place? She tilted her head, and for a second, just a second, I saw something move beneath her skin. A flicker of light, like static underwater. "This is post-occupational processing," she said. "We are the continuation of work. Death is not a severance. It is a transfer." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just burst out of me like a cork from a shaken bottle. "You're telling me this is what happens when we die? We go to some Kafkaesque purgatory and just keep working?" Eloise didn't blink. Most never notice. They were already working themselves to death. This is simply the next shift. The rage that rose in me was immediate and pure. "I didn't ask for this," I snapped. "I didn't choose it." At that, her lips curved, barely. Not a smile. More like a fracture. "No," she said. "But you practiced it. Every day." And I remembered. The to-do lists. The weekends sacrificed to emails. The hours I gave to other people's deadlines instead of my own dreams. The paintings I never finished. The silence I swallowed when I wanted to scream. I had been preparing for this place my whole adult life. "You may appeal," she said, pushing a second clipboard toward me. "But very few win." I didn't reach for it. Instead, I looked past her desk. A sign had appeared on the wall I hadn't noticed before. The departed remain until the unfinished is known. I felt like screaming. Like running. But somewhere deep inside me, something else stirred. Curiosity. Not just about where I was, but why. Why me? Why this? Why some people faded gently into light and others ended up here, in some twisted spiritual bureaucracy, filing pieces of themselves like documents. And I wondered, if I found what was unfinished, could I leave? Or worse. What if I didn't want to? I didn't sleep. I don't think people sleep here. There's no real fatigue, just a constant, low-frequency weariness. Like the emotional hangover after a funeral. Your body moves, your hands function, but something essential is off-kilter. Misaligned. I found myself assigned to a workstation. No one asked. No contract. Just a desk with my name printed on a plastic placard. Madeline Sorel / Processing Unit 73A. The task was simple. That made it worse. A monitor blinked endlessly, displaying faces. One by one. Some children, some elderly, some familiar in a way that gnawed at me like déjà vu with teeth. My job, I was told, was to tag them. Choose from a list: regret, longing, denial, obsession, or unresolved. No training. No guidance. Just judgment, on repeat. I tried asking what the purpose was, but Eloise was gone. Or maybe she never really existed beyond that moment. The silence of the office was deeper than before. There were whispers now. Not words, but movements. Sounds of rustling paper where there was no paper. The smell of burnt plastic that came and went like a passing mood. That's when I began noticing the others. Not the workers. The watchers. They didn't sit. Didn't move. Just stood at the far ends of hallways or behind half-open doors. Always in shadow. No features, just silhouettes that felt too precise to be accidental. Every time I looked directly at them, they vanished. But when I turned back to my screen, I could feel them leaning in, just inches from the back of my skull. Then, one day, I found the door. It was behind filing bay Z, in a neglected part of the structure where the ceiling dripped and the lights flickered like old memories. A supply closet, it seemed. But the handle was unlike any other, bone-white and slightly warm to the touch. The plaque on the door read simply, "For those who remember." I hesitated. Memory had become slippery. Even my own name felt like something I was borrowing. But there was something, one image, clearer than the rest, a painting. One I'd started years ago and never finished. Thick brushstrokes. A house with no windows. A storm held in sky blue oils. That painting had followed me here. I'd seen it on the wall of a corridor that shouldn't exist. As if this place had scanned me, archived me, and begun projecting my incompletions as scenery. I opened the door. Inside, darkness. But it wasn't empty. The room breathed. It felt like stepping into the hollow of a lung. And there, at the center, stood a version of me. Not metaphorical. Not imagined. Me. But younger. 32, maybe. Hair longer. Eyes harder. She stood barefoot in front of a canvas, painting the house I had seen in memory. But something was wrong, the house was bleeding. Thick red lines ran from its roof into the soil. She didn't seem to notice. I whispered, "Who are you?" She turned slowly, paintbrush dripping onto the floor. "I'm the you that stayed behind," she said. "The one you kept in the studio. The one you silenced when you put on suits and learned how to smile at clients." I stepped back, instinctively. "This isn't real." "It's not?" she asked. "Then why does it hurt?" And she was right. My chest ached. But it wasn't physical. It was the ache of becoming something you never chose, of abandoning pieces of yourself so gradually, you didn't even notice they were missing. "Why are you here?" I asked. "To remind you," she said, "that death doesn't return what you gave up. You have to come take it back." Then she held out the brush. I didn't take it. Because I felt the watchers behind me again. Closer this time. Breathing, not air, but sound. I turned around. And saw the walls moving. Not metaphorically. Literally. The plaster pulsing. Shapes pressing from the other side. Thousands of hands. Not reaching for me. Pushing me back. Into the world. When I woke up, if that word still meant anything, I was no longer in the room with my other self. The brush was gone. The bleeding house was gone. And the watchers were everywhere now. They didn't hide anymore. They stood openly at the ends of corridors, on desks, behind the thin glass of forgotten break rooms. Still no faces, still no words, but closer. Watching not just me, but everything. Supervising the system that supervised us. Something had changed. The office felt wrong. More wrong. The hum in the walls had sharpened into a constant digital tone, thin and high, like an old TV left on in another room. Paperwork began duplicating itself on desks. Lights flickered in patterns, not randomly, deliberately. Like Morse code no one taught us to read. And then, the whispers. At first, I thought it was stress. The accumulated weight of dead routine grinding the edge of my sanity down to powder. But they were real. They weren't thoughts. They were transmissions. Words not meant to be spoken, but processed. The system is cracking. She isn't adapting. Pull the memory logs. Reassign her to intake. But the voice that followed wasn't like the others. It wasn't flat. It trembled. It sounded scared. No. She's seen the door. That night, if you can call it that in a place without time, I stopped pretending I didn't feel the truth swelling beneath the architecture. This wasn't a place for the dead. It was a holding pattern. A spiritual recycling facility. Every person here, every paper they filed, every box they checked, every sorrow they indexed, wasn't just performing meaningless tasks. They were fueling something. Feeding it. Some system older than language. One that ran on unfinished stories. A consciousness engine. I snuck back to the hollow room. The one with the door. The bone-white handle was gone, but I knew where to press. When the wall gave way, I expected darkness. Instead, I saw the archive. It wasn't a library. It wasn't digital. It was alive. A sprawling biomechanical maze where memories crawled like insects through wires. Personal regrets cocooned in glass. Emotions fed through glowing tubes into machines shaped like pulsing organs. And at the center, suspended in a sphere of fluid. A child. No older than 8. Eyes shut. Pale skin luminescent like the underside of a jellyfish. Wires attached to her spine, her skull, her chest. I moved toward her, against every instinct in my body. I didn't want to know. But I had come too far to turn back. That's when I saw the label engraved into the glass, in clean metallic font. Subject 000, the first unfinished. Emotion harvest rate, 97.3% stable. Cognitive echo retention, active. Purpose, sustain continuity until global closure achieved. I didn't understand all of it. But I understood enough. This wasn't just the afterlife. This was a farm. A system that fed on unresolved selves. And this child, whoever she was, had been caught in its center. Maybe the first soul too raw to dissolve. Too fractured to release. The watchers weren't protectors. They were containment. Guards. I backed away. And for the first time, one of the watchers moved. It didn't step. It glitched. One frame closer, like a corrupted video. Then again. And again. Until it was inches from me. I couldn't scream. It reached for my face, not to hurt me, but to see me. Like it didn't quite believe what I was. Like I'd crossed a line I wasn't meant to know existed. Its hand brushed my temple. And everything stopped. The lights. The humming. The whispers. The entire office went still, like a film strip frozen between frames. Then a voice filled the space. Not out loud. Not inside my head. Everywhere. You've seen too much. I wanted to run. But the floor beneath me began to shift. The office was reconfiguring. Turning itself into a cage. Chapter 5, The Unfinished. By L.J. Wolfe. The office didn't fall apart. It folded. Like paper being creased, walls bending in unnatural geometry, desks melting into corridors, time slipping out through hairline cracks. Every fluorescent light flickered once, twice, then burst into sparks, revealing what had always been behind them. Eyes. Thousands of them. Wide and lidless, embedded into the walls like barnacles on a sinking ship. Watching. Recording. Processing. I fell to my knees. Not in surrender. Just because it was suddenly too heavy to stand, too much knowledge collapsing inside me like lungs caving inward. I understood now why no one resisted. Why the workers never looked up. Why even the dead kept busy. Because work is safer than truth. And truth. It was her. The child in the sphere. She was the system's foundation. The first unfinished story. The first life broken so deeply it couldn't dissolve. And we, the entire bureaucratic pantomime, we were her fragments. Memories, guilt echoes, emotional debris orbiting her like satellites around a collapsed star. But I was different. I wasn't finished either. And that made me dangerous. I heard footsteps behind me. Not the flickering glitched steps of the watchers, real ones. Human. I turned. My father stood there again. Older than before. Or maybe just more tired. His tie was crooked. His hands trembled. I tried to warn you, he said, voice brittle. They let us work because they know it keeps us from remembering. Remembering what? I asked. He nodded toward the sphere. That we're the ones keeping her here. That she's not feeding off us, we're feeding off her. All our avoidance, our half-lived lives, it built this place. The child opened her eyes. She didn't blink. And suddenly I knew her name. Lydia. I don't know how. But I did. And I knew, too, that she was not a stranger. She was someone I was supposed to be. A version of me that never grew up. That froze the moment something broke. Maybe it was trauma. Maybe it was silence. Maybe it was the day I looked at a canvas and said, not today. Maybe tomorrow. But tomorrow became a coffin. And now it had walls. I don't want to forget again, I whispered. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. Then you know what to do. The sphere's glass began to crack. Thin fractures spiderwebbed across its surface. Not from violence, but from recognition. The structure couldn't hold the truth anymore. Lydia looked at me, really looked. And she asked, without words. Are you ready to finish what we started? I stepped forward. Touched the glass. In that moment, I remembered everything. The painting. The story. The quiet compromises. The parts of myself I left behind in the name of being agreeable, promotable, realistic. I remembered being 8, and afraid, and creative, and unstoppable. I remembered what it meant to want something for no reason except that it was mine. And I said, yes. The sphere shattered. The watchers screamed, high, modulated frequencies like modems dying in the dark. The office began unraveling. Not with chaos, but peace. Like a waking dream letting go. Files turned to petals. Lights melted into sky. Walls folded upward into stars. And I fell again. This time not into darkness. Into light. I woke up in a hospital bed. Real. Cold. Beeping machines. IVs in my arm. A nurse gasped and called for a doctor. They rushed in, voices sharp and amazed. She's back, they said. She's awake. I'd been clinically dead for 6 minutes. They told me I was lucky. That most don't come back after that long. That I might have brain damage. That things might feel strange at first. But they didn't understand. Everything felt clear. I went home the next day. And I started painting again. Not for show. Not for money. Not even to express anything. Just to finish. To finish something. Because I know now what happens when we don't.